Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the latest webinar in our 10 Peacebuilding Innovations series, which is a year-long program of events and initiatives exploring IFIT's global and local work. My name is Yasmina Brankovic, and I am a research associate at IFIT. I work closely with IFIT's Inclusive Narratives Practice Group and on developing our Narrative Peacebuilding Hub. This is an online resource hub with publications, videos, toolkits, and other resources on narratives and peace building, which we will launch in early 2024. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Sela Kingoro, a member of IFIT's Inclusive Narratives Practice Group. Sela is a Kenyan social researcher, lawyer, mediator, and trainer with extensive experience in gender, peace, and security. She is the Senior Gender Advisor for the British Peace Support Team Africa, and previously was the head of research and policy at the Kenyan National Cohesion and Integration Commission. We are likewise joined today by Dr. Mauricio Mechalon, also a member of IFIT's Inclusive Narratives Practice Group. Mauricio is a Mexican professor of international relations and an analyst with expertise in peace building, geopolitics, and terrorism. He is the founder and director of the Mexico Research Center for Peace and a member of the Halifax International Security Forum. For the next half hour, we'll be sharing IFIT's approach to narrative peacebuilding and reflecting on lessons from applying the approach with the National Cohesion and Integration Commission in Kenya and IFIT's Brain Trust in Mexico. So, what are narratives and why are they important for peacebuilding? Narratives are systems of stories that shape our understanding of ourselves and others in society and how we mobilize for political and social action. I'd like to invite Sela to tell us more about how exactly narratives can drive conflict.
Thank you, Yasmina. I will share the Kenyan experience. So Kenya elects its national and political leaders every 5 years. A narrative has emerged based on the historical view of incidents of post-election violence since the early 90s. Kenyans rarely notice the ethnicity of their neighbors, colleagues, friends, until the 5th year, the election year. The neighbors they trade, play, go to church with for 4 years in peace are the very neighbors whose houses are torched when they are perceived not to support a certain political candidate. This narrative of directing violence against people based on their ethnicity in the 5th year is so entrenched to the extent that businesses close and people migrate back to their original homelands, returning only when the election process is over. So the ethnic division experienced during elections goes beyond the subsisting poll dynamics. It is in fact rooted much deeper in simmering grievances. Narratives can be visualized as trees that form part of a larger societal or national narrative landscape. The roots of each narrative are formed by facts, events, but sometimes by mythic stories about the collective past. In the Kenyan case, the roots of the 5th year narrative are based on structural factors such as historical legacies of past governments, as well as institutional factors such as the exclusion of some communities from state organs. Even with our Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission, the entire process, these grievances remain largely unaddressed. The lack of a proper address can deepen divisions and incentivize violence as a response. When we come to the trunk, it exhibits the visible narratives that are formed from the roots, justifying sometimes the actions that people take. In this case, conducting political mobilization along ethnic lines may be seen as a way to salvage communities from previous suffering. Therefore, directing violence against settlers and evicting them before or even during elections with the aim of complicating their participation in the vote may seem justified. Finally, we have the branches And these are policies, actions, and other outcomes that emerge from the trunk. For instance, the closure of businesses and the migration of people back to their home counties for fear of being targeted has been observed since the 2013 election. The fear of violence has influenced some government decisions, for instance, in relation to public school calendars. The government ensures that schools are closed during voting periods. And the government also gives public officers holidays to travel back to their home counties to vote. But as you may expect, there are other narratives or there are other trees around ethnic relations and elections born out of history. Unfortunately, what makes our society more polarized than it ought to be is the domination of only 2 to 3 trees, which overshadow and block the rest of the narratives that may exist, resulting in an us versus them environment. At this point, extreme views obscure moderate views, thereby perpetuating polarization even further. The dominant narratives are then reinforced by influential persons like politicians, the media, some local community leaders, religious leaders, amongst others. Over time, these dominant narratives begin to seem like reality, and they can incentivize violence. To achieve a very good conflict transformation, so societies should start to open up their narrative landscape so that it looks like a mixed forest, many narratives thriving together at the same time. But we are keen not to impose unifying narratives from outside. So instead, we work with Kenyans themselves to raise awareness of their biases and our own biases as well, to change conflict narratives from within and to amplify smaller stories with the aim of encouraging peaceful engagement. Thanks, Yasmina.
Thank you, Sela, for that really helpful overview. Mauricio, turning to you, can you tell us a little bit more of what Sela started about the approach that IFIT has developed for enriching narrative landscapes to promote social engagement and peace building, and especially what's unique about it?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Yasmina. Thank you, Sela, and thank you for the opportunity for being here. Look, I will give you an example, a very quick example about Mexico so that you can understand and relate. And of course, we work with many countries, not only Mexico, but look at this example. Mexico, there are 2 main narratives. And if you look at social media, if you listen to radio, if you watch television, if you read the newspapers, it would seem to any reader or any audience that there is only 2 possibilities, 2 big possibilities. Either you are with the president, which is called the 4th transformation, 4th, because of historical, as Sela explained, because of the roots of this narrative. It's the 4th transformation of Mexico, and so the president promotes certain policies and certain ideas, and it's a very, very strong narrative, and it has a lot of support. You might say that Andrés Manuel López Obrador has around 60% support of the population still now, and it is a very strong narrative. But then the second narrative is you are against the president, which is all the people that criticize the president and write against him in the newspapers and the media. So imagine that you are a Martian and you come to Mexico and you just watch all this, and there's only 2 narratives. Either you are with him or you are against him. What we try to do in IFIT is that we need to complexize this forest. It is not only composed of 2 trees. And one of the characteristics of countries as Mexico is that we live in very centralized countries. In everything goes around the capital, Mexico City, which is a huge city. So what IFIT does actually is, one, we try to elevate consciousness, raising the awareness that there is a narrative dynamics here. And then we need to visibilize, show that there are many other narratives around these topics and around other topics. Some of them emanating from different parts of the countries, which is not the capital, and they are talking about different things. They are concerned about different things, and then we enrich the narrative landscape. This is only a beginning process in Mexico. We are only starting to work here, but there is an organization that is actually conducting interviews in different parts of the country to show what other stories emerge from other parts of the country. And that creation of a more complex landscape allows IFIT to design ways to intervene with local actors and with local partners that can work towards a less conflicting narrative and less polarized narratives.
That's great. Thank you, Mauricio. So Sela, you've worked closely with Kenya's National Cohesion and Integration Commission to apply and test IFIT's narrative peace-building approach, as you mentioned. Can you tell us a bit about that work and the processes and the tools that the Commission has used so far and plans to use? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So thank you for the question. I had said I wanted to tell you a little bit about the National Cohesion and Integration Commission before I delve into the work they are doing about narratives. So the National Cohesion and Integration Commission is one of the institutions established as a recommendation of the Kofi Annan mediation that followed the 2007-2008 post-election violence. It is a creation of an Act of Parliament from the year 2008. And in its 14 years of operation, the Commission has identified that ethnic-driven election violence is one of the biggest impediments to its efforts in achieving a harmonious and peaceful Kenya. Notably is the rivalry between 2 major communities, the Kikuyu and the Luo, which can be traced way back to independence times. Events that happened, between the leaders of these 2 communities over time has bred some form of mistrust and tension that leads to violence, especially during the electioneering periods. So the Commission is working at amplifying smaller stories about the relationship between these 2 communities to, like Mauricio said, increase the complexity of the narrative landscape, because the dominant narratives seem to bring out or to highlight more the negative interaction between the 2 communities. The Commission's approach consists of 3 stages. We have the assessment stage, the strategic planning stage, and the implementation stage. So I'll share with you how each of these stages has been approached. So the first stage is the assessment stage, where the commission started with conducting a literature review of published documents, media pieces, including newspapers from the archives in Nairobi dating way back to the 60s, using online resources as well. This was followed by an in-depth group consultation with various communities, not just the Kikuyu and the Luo. The commission's plan included visiting 13 counties out of the 47 counties of Kenya. 5 of these counties are dominantly Luo, or they are inhabited dominantly by the Luo community, and the other 5 are inhabited dominantly by the Kikuyu community. Then 3 counties are inhabited by other communities besides the Luo and the Kikuyu. Now, each consultative forum has about 15 people, and the forums are highly homogeneous in the counties where the communities are dominant. So in dominantly Luo counties, the consultative forums are Luo only, and then we have Kikuyu only forums, and then we have forums with other communities. They may be mixed to focus on a number of things I'm going to share with you. So in these forums, the commission starts with mapping the roots, trunks, and branches of dominant narrative trees using sketches and sticky notes. It's a participatory process where the participants of the forum develop this dominant tree. The discussion also highlights the main institutional or structural factors, who are the actors, as well as the possible entry points, for example, elections. And then the participants identify alternative or overshadowed narratives at the local level that could have an impact on the narrative landscape. In this stage, some of the lessons that came out were the importance of having psychosocial support counselors within these consultation processes, because there are times when traumatic incidents were brought up and these provoked emotions, and the psychosocial support was really handy. Also, it was very interesting to hear communities reflect about themselves. It was easier for communities to talk about other communities, but in the tool, there was an inbuilt reflection about, what do you think the other communities think about you? And I think this was a very interesting process, with the communities also reflecting and talking about their own narratives and how they think they are perceived. In the second phase, the strategic planning phase, this hasn't been done yet, but the commission will invite partners from various sectors to help design, but more importantly, implement a strategy. Partners will include local level actors such as elders, local leaders, then government officials from both local and national government, the media, research institutions, civil society organizations, the private sector, as well as development partners, among many others. The main aim of this stage is to develop a theory of change by identifying a goal and strategies that can help us attain that goal. Then interventions that can be done at both community level, at regional level, in other words, county level or several counties coming together, but also at national level, will be developed detailing the required resources, responsible organizations, and a potential time frame. As a sector convener, the Commission will lead fundraising efforts for the implementation of this plan together with other partners. So in the final phase, this is the implementation phase, which will be fully reliant on the strategic plan. Interventions will then be implemented at community level to help build smaller narratives from within, or at county or regional level to influence leaders within and across major networks and institutions, and also to inspire new thinking among these leaders. But also some activities will be implemented at national level to influence large segments of society with the aim of enriching the narrative landscape. Thank you, Yasmina.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that really interesting overview and reflections on the process in Kenya. Mauricio, you, as you mentioned, have worked closely with IFIT's Brain Trust in Mexico and elsewhere to apply IFIT's narrative peacebuilding approach. Can you tell us about that work and also how it might differ from what we've done in Kenya?
Yes, of course. In Mexico, we are, the Mexican Brain Trust is actually learning and trying to adapt some of the tools that they have developed in Colombia, and together with the Colombian Brain Trust and the Venezuela Brain Trust with the narrative framework. So I want to share a couple of examples of what they have done in Colombia and Venezuela, so that, and we are learning, we are trying to implement those aspects also in Mexico. But look, in Colombia, they developed a toolkit for debates that is precisely like in election times, like exactly as it happens in Kenya, and it happens almost everywhere. The landscape tends to polarize and become very, very conflictive. So what they did is they used the narrative approach, all the framework that we have been developing in the narrative inclusive group, in the inclusive narrative practice group, and they adapted it to how to debate. Like, for example, the use of language. And let me put you a very concrete example. What words tend to polarize more in a specific debate? So let's suppose that you are working with the debating teams and you actually establish an agreement of not using different words, and you say, I don't want the other part to say the word terrorist because it creates more inflammatory discourse. So they go and say, okay, what is your actual concern? When you mention the word terrorist, what is your concern about that? So you might say, well, actually, my concern is the violence or the fear. Okay, can we agree that we can debate around violence and around fear and around, no, my concern is the structural factors that are behind the terrorism. Okay, so can we debate around the structural factors instead of using the word terrorism? So that is the toolkit, and we have the toolkit, and you can take a look, and of course it's being tested in different areas. But let me give you the other example. They're using this in Venezuela right now with the work of the International Criminal Court on the process of transitional justice in Venezuela. And the Colombia and the Venezuela team are actually trying to use these tools and the narrative framework in general to create more inclusive narratives that actually build bridges, so that the work of all the transitional justice project in Venezuela doesn't actually create obstacles. So what language is used? How can you adjust this language towards creating more bridges between the different conflicting parts in Venezuela? How can this use of narratives can actually build dialogue and understanding between the parts? And it is very interesting how they are applying the framework, because they're not doing exactly, and let me share this with the audience, they're not doing exactly step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 of our framework. What they got is the concept behind the framework, and they are adapting it to the context of Colombia and to the concept of Venezuela, and they are sharing 7, 8, 9 different examples of how you can actually use the concept not only in the way that we originally devised it. So we are also learning from this process of how the practical activity teaches us how to use this framework in different various ways. Thank you very much, Yasmina.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Also thinking about how it's applied in these different contexts to adjust to the local needs. So Sela, our final question of today's session is for you. Can you just share with us some key innovations and lessons learned from developing and applying IFIT's narrative peacebuilding approach in these different countries facing polarization and deep-rooted conflict?
Indeed, Yasmina. For me, the main takeaway is that narrative strategies and tools are integral to peace building, as sustainable peace often requires narrative transformation at local levels, but also at national level. I have also learned that depending on context and also resources, IFIT's narrative peace-building approach can be a process that's implemented from scratch, like in the Kenyan case, where the project specifically adopts the narrative approach in establishing and wanting to make the narrative landscape more complex. But on the other hand, this approach can be integrated in existing peace-building activities. Like Mauricio just mentioned, the case of Colombia, where there was already existing interventions in the form of debates, but the narrative approach is incorporated in these debates to enhance the impact of these peace-building activities. In Venezuela as well, the transitional justice process is ongoing, but the narrative approaches are adapted into this intervention to ensure better impact. Thank you, Yasmina.
Wonderful. Thank you both, Sela and Mauricio, for sharing those really valuable insights. I wanted to highlight the important lesson also from all of this work that imposing certain narratives or promoting certain narratives that we prefer might not be very effective, because in extremely polarized contexts, people tend to reject any alternative narratives, to the ones that they support. So we have developed these different tools and strategies, this different approach, which we have found to be much more effective. So thank you to everyone who joined us for today's discussion. We look forward to seeing you at our next 10 Peacebuilding Innovations event. And also please be sure to look out for our announcement of the launch of IFIT's Narrative Peacebuilding Hub and the wealth of resources it offers in early 2024. We will be sharing it soon. Thank you again for joining us today.